Hello everyone, this is Dr. Leili Hatami. Welcome back to my channel. In this video, we're going over the anatomy of blood. Blood is a crucial component of the cardiovascular system. The cardiovascular system is composed of the heart, blood vessels, and blood. As the cardio means heart and vascular means blood vessels. We're going to learn about the heart in chapter 19 and blood vessels in chapter 20. And now in chapter 18, we're going to begin our study of cardiovascular system by examining the blood. Blood circulates throughout the body in blood vessels. At the end of this chapter, we're going to learn about the important components of the blood and also the major functions of the blood. We are going to learn about the features and functions of red blood cells, to study the structure of the hemoglobin and its function, how the red blood cell can be produced, and also to know about the different type of white blood cells, their structure and their function. Now let's talk about the blood. Blood is the only fluid tissue in our body, which is the specialized connective tissue. So please make sure you know the blood is not a cell, is not considered as an organ. The blood actually is a tissue. Is the specialized type of connective tissue and it's the only fluid tissue in our body. Did you know that blood makes up about 8% of our body weight? And also, blood is a little bit like viscose than water. It's approximately 5 times more viscose than water. That's why it can seem a bit sticky sometimes. Blood temperature is actually a little bit above the body temperature, like around like 100.4 degree Fahrenheit or 38 degrees Celsius. The pH of blood is important. It's slightly alkaline. It's about like between 5.35 to 5.45, slightly alkaline. When it comes to how much blood we have, it's a little bit different. On average, adults have around 4 to 6 liters of blood circulating in their bodies. But here's a fun fact. Males tend to have a bit more, around 5 to 6 liter, and female they have about 4 to 5 liters. But the blood performs several essential functions in our body. We can divide the functions of the blood to the transportation, regulation, and protection. One of the primary functions of blood is to transport different substances throughout the body. This includes the respiratory gases like oxygen and carbon dioxide, nutrients like glucose, the amino acids, and also lipids, the hormones which going to be produced by endocrine glands, and metabolic waste to be eliminated from the body. The regulation job for blood actually plays a vital role in maintaining the homeostasis. It can regulate the pH level by carrying buffers that prevent drastic changes in acidity or alkalinity. Blood also helps maintain the balance of ions like sodium, potassium, calcium in interstitial fluids, ensuring the proper cellular functions Additionally, blood regulates the body temperature by moving heat around and releasing it through our skin. So when we're too hot, it helps us cool down, and when we're too cold, it helps us warm up. So please make sure the blood can maintain the homeostasis or stable the internal environment which is necessary for the body's proper functioning, like regulate the pH level, the ion composition of interstitial fluid, the water content, and also the body temperature. The protection job for blood is actually the blood provides protection against toxins and pathogens, including bacteria, viruses, and other harmful substances. Blood can do this because of white blood cells, which is the component of the blood, and it's has a crucial role in the immune response by identifying and neutralizing foreign invaders. And also blood contains antibodies and other immune system components that help defend the body against infection and disease. So then we can summarize the functions of the blood with the transportation, regulation, and protection. What is the composition of the blood? Blood is a unique type of connective tissue that's made up of two components, two main parts: blood cells and fluid portion. The blood cells, which are also known as formed elements because most of these are not the actual or true cells like the red blood cells or the platelets. The only complete cells or true cells are white blood cells. So that's the reason it's better to call the blood cells as formed elements. So we call the cellular part of the blood as formed elements, which it includes erythrocytes or red blood cells, white blood cells or leukocytes, and plate cells or thrombocytes, which each type of blood cell has its own specific job. And then the fluid portion of the blood is called plasma, which is mostly made up of water but also contains different proteins, electrolytes, nutrients, hormones, and waste products. If we withdraw the blood and place it in tube and then centrifuge it, this blood sample, we can separate the blood component. So as you can see in this test tube, we are going to separate the blood into these three portions. The bottom portion, which you can see by the red color, is composed of the erythrocyte, which is 40% of the whole blood, which is the most dense component. That's the reason it's going to be found on the bottom of the tube. And then the top part of the tube would be plasma, which is 55% of the whole blood and is the least dense component. And between the plasma and erythrocyte, we have a very thin grayish layer, which is called a buffy coat. So, and buffy coat plus erythrocyte both gonna make the formed elements. Now let's break down the features of plasma. The plasma is a straw-colored, sticky fluid portion of blood. Its color can vary slightly depending on its concentration and the presence of other substances. Plasma is primarily composed of water, so 90% of plasma is water. Along with water, it contains over 100 different kinds of molecules, including ions like sodium, potassium, chloride, calcium, nutrients like glucose, amino acids, lipids, the waste products like urea, ammonia, and carbon dioxide, and proteins. These are the components of the blood plasma. There are three main types of protein found in plasma: albumin, globulins, and fibrinogen. Albumin helps keep water from diffusing out of blood into the extracellular matrix of tissue. Globulin includes antibodies that help defend the body against infection and also transporter protein that carry lipids, iron, and copper. Fibrinogen, this protein, is crucial for blood clotting. When a blood vessel is injured, fibrinogen is converted into fibrin, forming a mesh-like structure that helps stop bleeding by forming a clot. So as you can see, these three different type of proteins found in blood plasma, they have different functions. So as I mentioned, the albumin, which is the most abundant type of plasma, is a protein in plasma. It has the important job for the keeping water from diffusing out of the blood into the interstitial tissue. Globulin can be like antibodies working for our immune system, or they can act as transporter protein for transportation of some molecules like the lipid, iron, copper, and fibrinogen. These protein gonna be helpful for clot formation, blood clot formation. Let's talk about the form element. So after centrifugation of the blood, we divided or we separated the blood into these three parts, which the bottom part and the middle part is composed of the erythrocytes and buffy coat, which is called formed elements. The erythrocytes or red blood cells, these cells are responsible for transporting the oxygen and carbon dioxide throughout the body. Hematocrit, it refers to percentage of blood volume occupied by red blood cells. In male, it's typically around 47% plus minus 5%, and in female is a little bit lower. It's going to be around 42% plus minus 5%. In clinical practice, hematocrit values are often used to diagnose and monitor conditions such as anemia, dehydration, and polycythemia, which means the excess amount of red blood cells, and also the other blood-related disorders. The buffy coat, which it was the thin gray layer between the erythrocyte and the plasma, it contains the white blood cells or leukocytes and platelets or thrombocytes. It's a tiny portion making up less than 1% of the total blood volume. Leukocyte or white blood cell, these cells form a crucial part of the immune system, defending the body against infections and disease. There are five main types of white blood cells. Each of these white blood cells, they have their own role in protecting the body. Thrombocyte or platelets, these are the small cell fragments that play a vital role in blood clotting. When a blood vessel is injured, platelets help form a clot to stop blooding and also promote the wound healing. Now let's talk more about the erythrocyte or red blood cells. These fascinating little structures known as red blood cells, they're measuring just 7.5 micrometers in diameter, which they are so tiny. The red blood cells are the most numerous type of formed elements, like 45% of the blood is actually red blood cells. If you look at the blood smear under microscope, you can find red blood cells so easily because there are a lot. So then the RBCs or red blood cells or erythrocytes are the most numerous of all the form elements in our blood. Now, when it comes to numbers, in females, we typically find about 4.3 to 5.2 million of these cells per cube millimeter, while in males it's a slightly higher range, around 5.2 to 5.8 million cells per cubic millimeter. That's the reason the hematocrit in male is more than the female, because of the more number of the erythrocyte in male than female. Okay. So speaking about the red blood cell, we should remember that the red blood cell is responsible to carry the oxygen. Actually, we can say the red blood cells are the oxygen transporting cells. Along with oxygen, it also can carry the carbon dioxide, but it only can carry 20% of the carbon dioxide. In red blood cells, they do not have organelles, they do not have nuclei. Instead, they are going to be filled with protein hemoglobin. In red blood cells, about 95% of the proteins are made of the hemoglobin. They even lack the organelles like mitochondria. So they rely on anaerobic mechanism to generate the energy they need. This means they do not directly use the oxygen they carry for their own energy requirements. This unique setup contributes to their efficiency as oxygen transporters. They're solely focused on delivering oxygen to tissues throughout the body without using it for their own metabolic processes. So, not having nuclei or the other organelle, it gives them more space to have the hemoglobin as the important protein for carrying the oxygen. And also, there is another cool fact that the red blood cell have this unique biconcave shape, as you can see. This biconcave shape gives them about 30% more surface area. This is another factor which gives the red blood cell more efficiency for carrying oxygen. But they live for about 100 to 120 days before they retire from the circulation. But don't worry, the red bone marrow always is going to produce red blood cells. So they originate in the red bone marrow. Speaking about the red blood cells, so as you can see in this picture, if you look at the blood smear, you easily can find the red blood cell as they look like a round, pinkish or reddish color cells. And then in this picture, you can see how these like cells are biconcave, which it gives them more surface area. Let's talk about the hemoglobin a little bit more. In red blood cells, about 95% of the proteins are made of the molecule called hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is a special kind of protein that's shaped like a globe and is made from two pairs of smaller proteins unit called polypeptide. So the hemoglobin is composed of four polypeptide chain or two pairs of polypeptide. So we have alpha chain 1, the alpha chain 2, beta chain 1 and beta chain 2. So total we have 4 polypeptide chain, which as you can see, each of these polypeptide chain contain a molecule of heme. So this is a molecule of heme, which each heme molecule, it contains one iron atom, which the iron atom gonna be bind to the oxygen molecule. So in this way, each molecule of hemoglobin can carry 4 molecule of oxygen, as each of these heme molecule or iron atom gonna be bind to one oxygen molecule. So in this way, each molecule of hemoglobin can carry 4 oxygen molecule. Okay, now let's talk about the leukocyte or white blood cell. Leukocyte or white blood cell are broadly classified into two main categories based on their appearance under a microscope. We are going to divide them to the granulocytes and agranulocytes. The granulocyte means granular leukocytes. These white blood cells, they have visible granule in their cytoplasm. An agranulocyte, which means they do not have the visible granules in their cytoplasm, as A means no or none. The granulocytes include neutrophils, eosinophil, and basophil. So as you can see, neutrophils, they have a multi-lobed nucleus, and then their cytoplasmic granules are kind of like a pale and then light purple color. The eosinophil, they have bilobed nucleus and their cytoplasmic granules are red in color. And the basophil, they have bilobed nucleus, which the purple black granules gonna be found covering the nucleus. The agranulocyte, which is also called agranular leukocyte, unlike granulocytes, these type of white blood cells, they do not have visible granules in their cytoplasm. Instead, they have a more uniform appearance. Agranulocytes include lymphocytes and monocytes. So as you can see in this blood smear, the lymphocyte, they have a large spherical nucleus with a thin rim of cytoplasm around it. And the monocyte, which is the largest white blood cell, they have a kidney-shaped nucleus with abundant pale blue cytoplasm around it. There is a mnemonic which says, never let monkeys eat bananas, which you can learn which white blood cell is the most abundant type and which one is the rare one. N stands for neutrophil. It means the neutrophil are the most abundant type of white blood cell. L stands for lymphocyte. After neutrophil, we have lymphocyte more. M stands for monocyte. E stands for eosinophil. And then the rare one is basophil. So in this way, from the most abundant to the rare one, we have neutrophil, lymphocyte, monocyte, eosinophil, and basophil. Leukocytes are between 4,100 and 11,000 white blood cell per cubic millimeter of blood. And as you saw, we divided their based on their appearance to the granulocyte and agranulocyte. White blood cells are essential for protecting the body from infectious microorganisms such as bacteria, the fungi, parasites, viruses. They're like the body's defense force against invaders. They originate in the bone marrow where they are produced through a process called hematopoiesis. White blood cells are the only form elements that can leave the blood and function in other tissues, especially in loose connective tissue. This ability to move out of blood vessels and into tissues is called diapedesis. So the only cells, the only form elements of the blood which they can leave the blood is going to be the leukocyte or white blood cells. And then there is another term which is leukocytosis, which means increase in number of the white blood cells. When we have white blood cells more than 11,000 is called leukocytosis, which mostly indicates an infection or inflammation in the body. Speaking about the granulocyte, let's go over the neutrophils. Neutrophils are the most abundant type of the white blood cells, which they play a crucial role in defending us against bacterial infection. So they can engulf the bacteria, and through phagocytosis, they can actually destroy the bacteria. One of their main job is preventing the infection from spreading and destroying the bacteria. Neutrophil, if you look at them under microscope, as I mentioned before, they have a multi-lobed nucleus. Does not mean that they have like a multiple nucleus. Their nucleus is segmented. Usually they have their nucleus has 2 or 6 lobes. In this picture, you can see the neutrophil with 3 lobes. And if you look at their cytoplasm, the granules in their cytoplasm stains light purple. When neutrophils encounter bacteria, their granules release enzymes and other substances that help break down and neutralize the invaders. After completing their mission, neutrophils often die in this process. Along with the captured bacteria and tissue debris, this mixture of dead neutrophils, other white blood cells, debris, and bacteria is what we commonly refer to as pus. So the pus is composed of dead neutrophils, other leukocytes, plus tissue debris and dead bacteria. Next, granulocyte is eosinophil, which is a type of white blood cell that makes up about 1 to 5% of all white blood cells. If you look at them under microscope, their nucleus typically has 2 lobes and their granules stain red. Now let's talk about what they do. The eosinophils play important roles in our body's defense system, especially when it comes to allergic reaction and parasitic infection. When we have an allergic reaction, eosinophils help to dampen and eventually end the response. They release substances that help regulate inflammation and keep the immune response under control, preventing it from causing too much harm to our own tissues. Similarly, when our body is invaded by parasites, eosinophils are there to help fight them off. They release toxic substances that are particularly effective against parasites, helping to neutralize and destroy them. So if there are large amount of eosinophil more than the normal amount, so it means that there should be an infection like a parasitic infection or the allergic reaction. Next, granulocytes are the rarest white blood cell, which they are basophils, which make up about less than 1% of all leukocytes. If you look at them under microscope, their nucleus typically has 2 lobes and their granules stain dark purple, which is gonna mask or cover their nucleus. So it's kind of hard to find their nucleus under these granules. And now let's talk about what they do. They're loaded with granules that contain substances like histamines and heparin. So these two important factor is the chemical factor which they're gonna release them when they detect an injury or infection. which histamines help to dilate blood vessels, increase blood flow to the area, and make blood vessels more permeable. So then allowing white blood cells to reach the site of injury or infection more easily. And heparin, on the other hand, helps to prevent blood from clotting too quickly at the site of injury. Or in summary, we can say the basophil functions in inflammation mediation. And also, these cells are very similar to the mast cells we have in our connective tissue. They act similar to the mast cells of the connective tissue. Next, we have the category of the agranulocyte, which means we cannot find the visible granules in their cytoplasm. So we have lymphocyte, which lymphocyte are a type of white blood cells that make up about 20 to 45% of white blood cells. When you look at lymphocyte under a microscope, you'll notice that its nucleus is usually large, spherical, and stains dark purple. And then you can find a very thin rim of the cytoplasm around their nucleus. Now here's the cool part about the lymphocyte. Lymphocytes are highly effective in fighting off infectious organisms. They actually are the most important cells of our immune system. We have two main classes of the lymphocyte. We have T cells and B cells, or T lymphocyte and B lymphocyte, which T cells attack foreign cells directly, destroying them to protect the body. And B cells, on the other hand, are like the factories. They specialize in producing antibodies, which the antibodies are proteins that tag invaders for destruction by other immune cells. So please don't forget, T cells and B cells are the two main classes of lymphocyte, which these are the most important cells of the immune system, and they act differently from each other. T cells attack foreign cells, or like the tumor cells directly, but B cells going to be differentiated to the other cells, which is called plasma cells, which then plasma cell can produce the antibodies. Okay, now let's go to the other type of the agranulocyte, which they are monocytes. Monocytes are composed of 4 to 8% of white blood cells. These are the largest leukocytes. If you look at them under microscope, you can notice that they have a large kidney-shaped or bean-shaped nucleus. And as I mentioned, these are the largest leukocytes, and they can leave the blood and enter to the connective tissue, and then they can be transformed into the macrophages, which the macrophages are the phagocytic cells, so they can engulf the microorganism and destroy them. So what is the origin of the macrophages in our connective tissue? They are originate from the monocytes. Next, we have the platelets or thrombocytes. Platelets or thrombocytes are not complete cells like other blood cells. Instead, they are tiny cell fragments that play a crucial role in clotting process to stop bleeding. These platelets are formed when larger cells called megakaryocytes in the bone marrow break apart into smaller pieces. These smaller pieces or platelets are then released into the blood. So as I mentioned, the primary function is to help in the clotting of blood. When a blood vessel is injured, platelets rush to the site of injury and form a plug to stop bleeding. They do this by sticking to the injured blood vessel walls and to each other, forming a temporary barrier to prevent further blood loss. Next, let's go and talk about the blood cell formation, which is going to be through the process. It's called hematopoiesis or hemopoiesis. So hematopoiesis or hemopoiesis is the process by which the blood cells are formed in our body. This incredible process begins very early in our development, even before we're born in embryos. And also, it continues throughout our entire lives. After birth, all the blood cells originate in bone marrow. Every single day, our body produces about 100 billion of them. Do you remember we mentioned that for example, the red blood cell can live around 100 to 120 days. So then instead, every day our body is going to produce a million or billion of these red blood cells. Bone marrow is a soft, spongy tissue found inside all of our bones. It's like the factory where our blood cells are made. There are two main types of bone marrow. We have red bone marrow and yellow bone marrow. Red bone marrow is the active production site for new blood cells. It's packed with stem cells and immature blood cells, including those that will eventually become red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. Where we can find a red bone marrow in adult, they're going to be found in epiphysis of long bones, which are going to be the ends of long bones, as well as in the bones of the pelvis, ribs, spine, and skull. The yellow bone marrow, so as you can see here in this picture, you can find the picture or the microscopic picture of the red bone marrow. So as you can see, is a soft, spongy tissue which composed of the immature blood cells, the blood sinusoid, which is the type of capillary. Also, you can find many reticular fibers, reticular cells, and also the stem cell. Okay, now let's go back and look at a yellow marrow. Yellow marrow is considered dormant because it's not actively producing the blood cells. It makes blood cells only in emergencies. Instead, yellow marrow is filled with fat cells. That's the reason it seems like a yellow color, because it's mostly composed of the adipocyte or fat cells. In adults, yellow marrow is primarily found in central cavities of long bones or the medullary cavities of the long bone. And then in adults, yellow marrow gonna be replaced. Red marrow gonna be replaced by yellow marrow in the limbs between the ages of 8 and 18 years. Both types of bone marrow have a tissue framework made up of reticular connective tissue, which includes reticular cells and blood sinusoids. This framework provides support and structure for the bone marrow and allowing blood cells to produce and move throughout the tissue. It's important to note that all blood cells, including red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets, originate from a single type of cell called a blood stem cell. This stem cell can differentiate into different types of blood cells or stem cells. We have lymphoid stem cells, which they give rise to lymphocytes, and then we have myeloid stem cell, which they give rise to all other blood cells. It means red blood cells, platelets, and also the other type of white blood cell, including monocyte, basophil, eosinophil, and neutrophils. In this picture, you can see the differentiation of blood cells in the bone marrow, which it involves a series of steps, starting from the blood stem cell or hematopoietic stem cell, which it can divide and differentiate to these two type of stem cell. We have myeloid stem cell and lymphoid stem cell. So as you can see, the lymphoid stem cell it only can give rise the lymphocytes. So finally T cell and B cell, and the myeloid stem cell is going to give rise erythrocyte, the granular leukocyte like eosinophil, basophil, neutrophil, and also monocytes and platelets. And we learned before monocytes, they can leave the blood, enter to the tissue, and then transform to the macrophages. At the end, we are going to talk about some of the disorders of the blood. Disorders related to the erythrocyte, we can talk about the polycythemia, anemia, and sickle cell anemia. Polycythemia is a condition characterized by an abnormal excess of erythrocyte or red blood cells in the blood. This condition results from a cancer of the bone marrow that produces too many red blood cells, or because of an external factor such as dehydration or lung disease, which can stimulate the overproduction of the red blood cells. So in polycythemia, we have the abnormal excess of erythrocytes, which these increased number of red blood cells can lead to thickening of the blood, which can impair circulation and increase the risk of blood clots and cardiovascular disorders. The other disorder of the blood related to the erythrocyte is called anemia, which is the condition where the level of erythrocytes or hemoglobin concentration in the blood are lower than normal. This can occur due to different factors such as blood loss, inadequate production of red blood cells, destruction of the red blood cell, or deficiencies in nutrients like iron, vitamin B12, and folic acid, which they are necessary to produce the red blood cells. Next disorder is sickle cell anemia, which is an inherited condition caused by a defective hemoglobin molecule. This defective hemoglobin molecule is called the hemoglobin S. The hemoglobin S. In individuals with sickle cell anemia, red blood cells become rigid and assume a sickle-like shape under certain conditions, such as low oxygen levels or dehydration. The sickle-shaped red blood cells can become trapped in blood vessels, leading to blockages, reduced blood flow, and tissue damage. This can result in pain, organ damage, and other complications. Then there are some other disorders related to the leukocyte. We have leukemia, which leukemia is a type of cancer that affects the white blood cells, leading to their uncontrolled growth and accumulation in the bone marrow and blood. Leukemia is classified into two main types based on the type of white blood cells involved. We have lymphoblastic leukemia involving lymphocytes and myeloblastic leukemia involving myeloid cells. In leukemia, abnormal white blood cells crowd out healthy cells in the bone marrow, leading to symptoms such as fatigue, weakness, frequent infections, and easy bruising or bleeding. There is another disorder of blood related to the platelets, which is called thrombocytopenia. Thrombocytopenia is a disorder characterized by an abnormally low concentration of platelets in the blood. We learned that platelets are crucial for blood clotting, so low platelet level can result in an increased risk of bleeding or easy bruising. Thrombocytopenia can be caused by different factors, including decreased platelet production in the bone marrow, increased destruction of platelet in the blood, and so symptoms of thrombocytopenia may include excessive bleeding from minor injuries, nosebleeds, and petechiae, which is the small red or purple spot on the skin, or bleeding gums. Okay, that was the end of this chapter. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any question, please comment down below or send me through the email.